start this off, and we'll get going. So, as I mentioned before, this week in GCOM 424, we're really going to dig into the process of creating diffuse texture maps in Photoshop. Last week we went over and kind of into this process like 2%, okay? This week we're really going to start to explore the process of getting things in, understanding the basic construction ideas and practices inside of Photoshop to make some really rockin' awesome great textures, okay? So today is going to be a lot of Photoshop stuff. I've mentioned before that Photoshop really is probably the most important application to know inside of our digital media pipeline, okay? You know, you're going to get out there and you're probably going to experience different design studios and 3D shops that are using a different 3D modeling and animation package. It's going to happen, but the one common denominator across everything is Photoshop, okay? We got to know Photoshop, and specifically, we have to understand how to use Photoshop through the lens and context of a game artist. Because how we use Photoshop inside the 3D world is very, very different than how the graphic designers or the web designers use Photoshop. So we're going to be exploring some ideas and some techniques in Photoshop that are really specific for us in the game world, okay, or for us in the 3D world. If there's one thing that you're going to become really, really good at over the next couple of weeks is working inside of Photoshop. So today we're going to dig into the application with a high degree of detail. Last week we just kind of chipped the surface. Today we're really going to gouge the surface and get in there and with our hands and get dirty with it. All right. I've put all of our content on the Creating Textures in Photoshop webpage. So if we take a look at it on renderography.com. You can see that all of our content today is going to focus in on Photoshop. And this week, we're going to redo the wine barrel texture. And I'm going to implore you to increase the quality of your wine barrel texture. Okay, now if you did a fantastic job with your wine barrel, as I'm seeing some of you guys around the classroom as you guys have, there's some really good looking wine barrels. I want you to use the stuff that we talk about today and redo the texture with these new ideas and techniques in your back pocket. Okay, because the diffuse texture map is the most important texture map inside of our entire pipeline. It really is the most important, okay? Because ultimately, the diffuse texture map is going to determine how our object looks on the surface, okay? It's kind of like our skin color. The thing that everyone is going to notice immediately is the diffuse texture map. It's going to work in harmony with some other texture maps that we're going to explore over the course of this semester, like the reflection map, the specular map. Shoot, if we have some time, I'd even like to talk about curvature maps a little bit and talk about how we can explore, how we can integrate all of those different image maps to create a really awesome rockin' final result. Okay. Now we can't forget about UV mapping. So this week's lab exercise is going to be an exercise in unwrapping things using the Moto UV mapping tool. So UV mapping is the moment you start to collect like cobwebs and you get rusty at it. These tools are kind of unique. The workflow is very unique. So it's important that we keep getting better and advancing our skill inside of this really conceptual UV mapping environment. This week, we're going to kick up the intensity a little bit, and we're going to start to explore how to UV map some really unique shapes. Last week, very simple shapes where we did, I think of a sphere, a cylinder, and a cube, right? Well, this week, we're going to be doing something that's very, very custom. And I have these little Lego bricks. They're actually stock content that comes with the Luxology Moto content installation. And they're going to give us an opportunity to understand the power of UV unwrap. And in addition, it's also going to give us an opportunity to continue working with the Project from View tool to create discrete separate UV islands for most of these pieces. In addition, we're also going to talk about how we can sew and join some of these UV islands together. Often it's easy to create a whole bunch of disconnected pieces and then sew them back together once they're done in the UV editor. Okay, we'll come back to that here in a minute. As we did last week, I've given you the project file that I would like you to use for your lab exercise in the resources section. So there it is. Go ahead and download it and save it to your personal hard drive if you haven't already. In addition, I've also given you access to 4 really, really fantastic videos that I made that directly address everything that we're going to talk about today in Photoshop. Okay? Questions on what we're going to be talking about today? No, everyone's good? Everyone basically understand the kind of like the 10,000-yard description? Okay, now I want you to do me a favor, okay, because I'm looking around the classroom and everyone's getting hot to trot to UV map all of these Lego bricks. Just put a pause on that for a second. I know it's like I've given you this wonderful toy to play with. Just put a pause on that idea for a second. We'll come back to the Lego bricks a little bit later because we want to spend some time talking about Photoshop, okay? The stuff that we're going to explore right now should be rolled into production on those Lego bricks, okay? Okay. Excuse me. Okay, let's go ahead and start. Okie dokie day. So let's get going here. Let me hide Chrome, get that out of here. And here's my Moto. And as you can see, much like you guys, I've also constructed a wine barrel. I want to very quickly kind of review some of the ideas and the principles that we discussed last week when creating our UV maps for our objects. Before we go any further, though, let's talk about what a UV map is and its role. Why are they so important? Why do we got to have them? Yeah, Dylan. Games need them. You have to have them inside the game pipeline, right? It's a must-have. Can't avoid it. You got to have some UV maps, okay? Game engines don't understand projection types. Okay, there are not, you don't have any 3D cameras or texture locators over in a game engine that are going to determine the placement of a texture file based on those general kind of global projection types. Okay, so we need to have the UV maps in the game pipeline. With that said, what do we gain by having a UV map? Control. Control of what?
The texture.
And specifically? Yeah, there it is. And the placement of details within the texture. Great job, Dylan. Absolutely. That's a big, big benefit. When we're using those global projection types in the shader tree, the computer's kind of taking over, right? The computer is figuring out where to place the texture, and we use very general kind of open-ended rules, like moving it, positioning and rotating and scaling it, to determine how that texture is going to show up across the surface of our geometry. With UV maps, we get the ability to go in and paint custom textures that allow us to place details where we want them, okay? And that's the most important idea, is that we are in our critical component inside of our texturing workflow. This is not something that's limited to working inside of Moto. Every application on the market uses UV maps. Every game engine is expecting to have UV maps associated with all the models that are brought in, okay? So we got to have them, we got to use them, everyone loves them, everyone uses them, okay? However, I understand I'm not, I'm a benevolent tyrant, okay? I do understand that the process of making UV maps is quite overlooked and marginalized, but it's important, okay? It's a critical step inside of our entire 3D modeling pipeline. If you get good at this, and if you like this, there are going to be a lot of opportunities in the future, okay? Because not everyone likes to do UV maps, okay? This is a great way for you to separate yourself professionally from the rest of the pack, okay? And personally, if I was hiring you as a 3D modeler, I would expect that you have this skill in your back pocket, okay? This is a required thing. So stay with it. Hang out, okay? Don't like bail on me, okay? This is something that you will get better at. So in today's lecture, we're going to talk about some other ways that will help you get better. I've already unwrapped it. And if you look over there in the UV editor, this is what we're getting, okay? Ultimately, this is the result that we want, okay? We want to fill as much of the UV space as we can with the texture, or with the island for the geometry in our scene, okay? Now, if you look carefully here, we're not wasting any space. Specifically, if you look at the borders here, down here at the bottom, over here, there isn't really a gap between the borders of our positive UV space. We want to populate as much of this space as we can to ensure that we're maximizing our real estate in the book. Well, the larger our UVs are in our coloring book, the more detail we'll be able to infuse in that texture map. The higher quality those UV islands will become if they are bigger within our scene. More on that later, okay? So we want to make sure that we're packing and placing our UVs as strategically as we can to ensure that we're getting the best results possible. We'll talk about some strategies a little bit later. We're gonna unwrap this object again just to kind of refresh our memories as to the process and the techniques and steps of UV mapping inside of Modo. But this ultimately is a good result. Okay. Another thing that we're always striving to achieve is UV maps that don't have any distortions, okay? And if you look very carefully inside of our scene, you can see that we have a number of fantastically straight lines, okay? All of these guys in here are really important going forward, okay? We want to try to resemble, or our UV islands should resemble as much as we can, a perfect grid for cylindrical objects. Okay, now this is really something that an idea that's really limited to the hard surface world. Once you start working with characters and organic shapes, it's going to kind of change a little bit. But for hard surface shapes, we want to try to get everything as uniformly justified vertically and horizontally as we can. Okay. Think perfect grid for as much as we can. It's a good starting point. Now, many of you guys were able to create a perfect grid using the UV unwrap tool last week. However, there were some inconsistencies with the result. So I want to show you some ideas and some techniques today that will ultimately help you create a perfect uniform grid like this. Okay? I'm going to out Mr. Dawson here. Mr. Dawson had some challenges with his UV maps, and he painstakingly went through and edited every single line, and he did a great job. And eventually what he got was a very usable UV map. However, there are some better ways of getting to the end result, and we're going to talk about that here momentarily. Okay? So we're always striving to have as many straight lines. This uniformity between all the pixels, all the polygons within our UV map is what we're after. Okay? That's what we're going for. Okay? All right, so let's jump back over into our UV map. I'm actually going to create a new one. And don't forget, whenever we're working with UV maps, it's important that we have a couple items inside of our scene selected before we get going. So here's our item list. I'm going to work on this item that's called barrel high. Okay, more on why I have a low resolution version of this coming up soon. Okay, I want to create a UV map for this item. And then down in the Lists tab, we get access to all of the UV maps that have been created for that item. Okay? Now, we talked about this last week, but it's a really important idea, so we have to kind of underscore it again. How many UV maps are you allowed to have per item for a game? One. Uno. Okay? One UV map per item. Okay? And that's a limitation by the game engines. If your models are staying here in Modo, you can have as many UV maps as you want. I think last week I showed you the 3D model of my Jeep, and I showed you that I had one item that had 4 or 5 different UV maps and 4 or 5 different textures that were associated with the with that object. Well, for us in the game world, one item, one UV map, one texture. Okay. Singles all across the row, okay? So we need to strategically design our UV maps to ensure that all of our islands are in one UV map. Uno, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, okay? So I'm going to duplicate this mesh item here real fast. Oops, here we go. Just gonna right click, choose duplicate from the pop-up list. And then on my duplicate, I'm going to just nuke my UV map. Okay, I'm going to clear it out just so we can start over and get a nice refresher onto the process that we're going to be using to unwrap this object and get good solid UVs. All right. So here's my little wine barrel model. Pretty simple. I like it. Just kind of a simple, silly looking little wine barrel. Some of the features that I've added on top of the basic shape are these cool little rivets. Okay. Little couplers for the metal bands. Whenever I'm designing a model, I often try to put myself in the mind frame of a cooper. I guess, you guys know the cooper is the type of person, the type of tradesman or woman that will actually make a wine barrel, right? The cooper. So I try to put myself in the mindset of the person that's actually making this. Well, we have big metal bands that are going around the circumference of our wine barrel, right? Well, how do those metal bands stay attached? I have little rivets, okay? Small little details like this that really go a long way to remind the audience that this is a man-made object that's founded in reality. Little things, little things. Now, I did this with geometry, but you could do this with the texture file, and we're going to show you that later, okay? For a game engine, this is way too many polygons. This is actually a high-resolution version of my map, and I specifically wanted you to see the high-res one so that we can understand the process of UV mapping a little bit easier, okay? So those are cool little details. I like those. I like those a lot. Got them all over the place. I also have this cool little inset at the top of my wine barrel, okay? And if you look very carefully at the way I've structured my loops, these guys in here, that's the metal band, and then I also have some additional geometry in here that's going to establish the thickness of the wooden planks as they go around the borders of my wine barrel. Okay, again, a detail that only someone like me would really start to focus in on, because I'm just an uber nerd when it comes to 3D modeling. Okay, this is a good shape. I like it, but we need to make some UVs for it. Last week we talked a lot about the strategy of generating UV islands across our mesh, okay? What was the first thing that we focused on last week? Do you remember which tool we were using? So what? Project from view. Project from view. I like project from view, right? It's a quick tool, or it's a tool that will allow us to quickly, and I mean quickly, get UVs on some very important parts of our model. Now, from last week's conversation and our exploration of the tool, what types of surfaces are really best used with the UV unwrap, or the project from view? Planar. How else would you describe planar?
Flat.
Flat. Project from view is awesome, awesome, awesome for flat surfaces. Okay, it allows us to create UVs quickly. Okay, so if you look at my mesh here, I have a whole series of flat surfaces that I want to explore. The first one would be the top of the wine barrel and the bottom of the wine barrel. Very, very flat and easy to unwrap. Okay, so here we go. There's the top, so all of this stuff in here, and of course, all of this stuff down here at the bottom. So let's talk about how we're going to use the tool. What's the first thing that we got to do in order to get a UV island for the top of the wine barrel and the bottom? Yeah. Select it. Everything begins and ends with a selection. Yep, so I'm going to select all these polygons. Oops. Let's try that again there, Pat. Go. And I'll just grab all these guys. There it is. And since I ultimately made this a subdivision surface, I have a little ring of polys outside. There we go. Hitting the shift and the up arrow will extend my selection by one row. And that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. This is a good starting point for our UV island. What's next? Yeah.
Control-Shift-A.
Control-Shift-A. What does Control-Shift-A do, Dylan?
It orientates the screen to, I don't know how to word it correctly, but it just, it projects from view. That's, I don't know how to.
Yeah, and I think you're on the right track. Perpendicular, absolutely. It's kind of, in my mind, it kind of looks directly straight on at the selected polygons, okay? It faces it, absolutely. I like it, okay? If our eyeballs created a plane, okay, a plane that went out from our eyeballs like this, it's going to orientate our viewport to have our selection be parallel to the plane of our face, okay? It's just going to look at it perfectly, dead on. So, mouse cursor in the OpenGL viewport, Control-Shift-A, bam, and now we're looking dead on at that polygon, or those polygons, and now we can utilize the Project from View tool. As we explored last week, the Project from View tool is found up in our UV toolbar. It's in the upper left-hand corner, and if we zoom in, here it is, Project from View. Now, what it is not is the UV projection tool, so keep that in mind. It's number 2 on the list. I very rarely, and I mean very, very rarely, use the UV projection tool. Okay, more on that later, so keep that in mind. Number 2 and number 3 are the all-stars in our toolbar. Project from View. Now, after I turn the tool on, where do I need to go, and what do I need to do? Yeah, And Carlos is right. So we need to put our mouse back over here in our OpenGL viewport. This tool is fundamentally not going to work if we start working with the tool inside of our UV grid. So we have to be, in every sense, over here. Okay? Once we're over here, we're free to click anywhere inside this viewport to capture those polygons as a UV and create our islands. Okay? So let me just click in my OpenGL viewport, and you can see immediately that the computer has taken a very quick snapshot of the polygons. Okay? Now, when it creates that snapshot, ultimately it's going to scale those UVs as much as it can to fit within inside of our positive UV grid. Okay? So if you look very carefully here, it's almost a perfect fit. There's very, very little space in here next to, between that edge and the border of our V axis. Okay? All right. So it's perfect. So mission accomplished. The top is done. Let's do the bottom. Same thing. Everything begins and ends with the selection inside of Modo. So the first operation is to select the polygons that we wish to make UVs for. There we go. Perfect. Something like that. I also want that outside row, so I'll hold down the Shift Up arrow to grab them. Control Shift A to auto fit my viewport to look dead on at the selected polygons, and project from view. Clicky, and I'm on my way. Waddell, question? Stretching? What? There's no stretching in this. I'm joking. Okay, so we have a little bit of an issue now, right? What is my issue that's shown up in this moment? Yeah.
Overlapping UV maps.
Yeah, so we have two separate UV islands that are sharing the exact same space, right? From your experience last week with creating very simple textures inside of Photoshop, what is going to happen if we were to texture this object with these UV islands? What's going to happen? What are the tops and the bottom of our wine barrel going to look like? Identical, right? They're going to look identical. Now, at times, this isn't bad, but we just have to think strategically through this, okay? Being a good 3D modeler is being like a good chess player. We often have to think 3 or 4 steps ahead of our competition, okay? Because especially in the UV mapping world, what we do here is absolutely going to influence what we're able to do in Photoshop and how that texture is ultimately going to be mapped back onto our model. Whenever I'm designing UV maps, I am always thinking to myself, how in the world is this going to look inside of Photoshop? Okay, so I ask myself a lot of questions. Are overlapping UVs, like this guy here, really something that I'm okay with? Do I need to have a different texture on the top opposed to the bottom? And only you can answer that question. Only you can prevent forest fires, so make sure you know before you send to Photoshop, okay? Because once you hit that Export UVs button, it is a point of no return, okay? Point of no return. It's like in the movie Back to the Future Part 3. You guys know that movie? Love that movie. It's like one of my favorite movies of all time, right? And if you know the movie, you know what I'm talking about. You know, it's at the very end. I'm going to spoil it for you if you haven't seen the movie. Sorry, I'm totally going to ruin it. But at the end of the movie, you know, Michael J. Fox and Doc Brown, you know, Marty and Doc Brown are trying to go back to the future, right? Because they're stuck in the Wild Wild West, you know, the 1880s, okay? And they got the train. They're pushing the time machine with the train, right? And there's a big windmill. That's the point of no return, right? So if they go past the windmill on the route, to the bridge, then they're going back in time, or they're dying. You know, they're going to crash. It's a point of no return. If they pass it, something's going to happen, and it's either going to be good or bad. All right. Hitting that Export UVs button is like that windmill. It's a point of no return. So we want to make sure our stuff is dialed and perfect and ready to go before we hit that button. Because what happens if we make a change to our UV map after we export it? Dylan's got it. The UV map and the Photoshop file are not going to line up. So what does that mean? It's wonky. So what ultimately are we going to have to change? Or the Photoshop document, okay? We only want to paint our texture instead of Photoshop document one time. So we got to make sure our UVs are dialed and perfect before we send it to Photoshop. Okay. All right, let's keep cruising here. I went off on a little bit of a tangent. I apologize. I do that from time to time. Now, for my texture, I want the bottom of my wine barrel and the top of my wine barrel to be two very different discrete objects. We have a little bit of a challenge in front of us as game artists because we have to design our models to be interacted with in a game engine, okay? And barrels are such a great example of this type of interaction pattern that game artists and game players are going to be using, right? Because what often happens when you're in a game and you run across a wine barrel, you can blow it up. You can push it over. Sometimes they fall out of traps and things like that. So we really, really, really need to make sure that all sides of my wine barrel are dialed and looking perfect, okay? If I know beyond any reasonable doubt the gamer is never going to see the bottom of the wine barrel, then the bottom and the top are going to be the same, right? We're going to make this prop as if it's going to be seen from all angles. So I'm going to separate out my UV islands to ensure that I can texture the top and the bottom differently. Now, last week we talked about some strategies that will allow us to do this. How can I very quickly separate those two overlapping UV islands apart from one another? I love it. I love it. And I like Dylan's technique here. What he's saying is just go back to OpenGL, grab the polygons that you know your UV island is using, so all of these guys. And let me just grab this outside row. There we go. Fail. I'm going to hit the up arrow here to expand my selection as it goes all the way around. There we go. And then once I've selected it in the OpenGL viewport, I can just activate the move tool and just move it out of the way. That's fine. This is totally legit. You can absolutely do this. However, there's a faster and easier way of doing this. Okay? What if I have 80 of these things that are all stacked on top of each other? I'm not going to select each one individually. I want to have the computer separate them out for us. Pack it. Pack UVs is amazing. It's a great tool that will basically allow us to do this exact same thing, but with some extra goodies thrown into the mix. Okay? Here we go. I'm going to double click on both UV islands. You can see that both the top and the bottom are selected simultaneously. And then over in my UV toolbar, check it out. Up here, we have, I always miss it. We have Pack UVs, that one right there. If I click on the button, you're going to get a pop-over in the center of your screen that looks something like this. And you get a couple different options. Now, 9 times out of 10, I change some of these, okay? Like, for example, I don't want the computer to automatically orient the pieces for me. I want to be able to control the rotation of my UV islands within the UV space, so I turn orient off, okay? However, so in my mind, really what the computer is doing here is that orient, this one, okay? Hello. Orient. My little thing isn't working anymore. My little highlighter. Okay, well, orient allows us to basically rotate, okay, all the UV islands. Stretch is going to scale them, and I almost always have stretch off, okay? Some good things, okay? It's going to scale them automatically for us. Sometimes I've noticed that it disproportionately scales them. So it physically, instead of it's going to try to fill the UV space with your UV island, okay? And then pack is going to move them. So pack is like move, stretch is scale, orient is rotate. However, look very carefully down at the bottom here. And I want my highlighter to work. Why isn't my highlighter working? There we go. Is it just locked on something? It is kind of locked on something. Okay, check this out. I want you to look at this option right there, lock stacked. This is an important one to remember, okay? When it's off, or excuse me, when it's on, it's going to look at all of the UV islands that are stacked together, and it's not going to move them apart from one another. You'll see why this is important in a minute when I start making UV islands for all of those little rivets on my mesh. Okay, and let's just hit OK, and there we go. Rock and roll. You can see that each one of my UV islands has been made smaller, and it's moved both of those UV islands to ensure that they can fit inside that positive UV space. Okay? Pack UVs is a great addition to our tool set, and it allows us to very quickly organize our UV map before we export it. Okay? Okie dokie. Let's keep cruising here. From our experience working with the UV mapping tools inside of Modo, you've already started to discover that whenever Modo creates any UVs, it's always going to place them right smack dab in the center of our UV space. So it's going to populate this area almost exclusively. Okay, so I would implore you guys to kind of follow this technique or just incorporate this technique. Since this is our work area, kind of my canvas, often whenever I'm done with a UV island, I just move it out of the way. Just move it off to the side. We're eventually going to go pack all these back here in a minute, but in moving these to the left, it just clears up our workspace. We're able to see what's going on a little bit more easily now. So I often hide the polygons that are already UV mapped. That way I don't accidentally UV map them again, and it makes the tools work a little bit more efficiently in my experience. All right, I'm going to do the barrel, so I'm going to double click the barrel and hide, excuse me, I need to, Shift H will hide the unselected ones. So now I just have the barrel. Okay. Now our project from view tool is not going to work in this particular situation, right? Because the project from view tool is kind of like a camera. It's just going to take a snapshot of our models from a very specific angle. If I was to take a snapshot of our model from like the front, it's not going to generate accurate UV islands for the objects on the back. So what tool should we use in our situation here? Unwrap. UV Unwrap is amazing. You guys are really going to like working with UV Unwrap. Now UV Unwrap works off of a different component selection, right? With project from view, what were we selecting? Polygon. So what are we going to be selecting here with UV Unwrap? Edges. Edges. I like UV Unwrap. They're fun ones. Okay. Okay. So I want to go into my edge component mode, and I'm going to select some very specific edges. Now, the edge that we select vertically, going down the spine, if you will, of our wine barrel, is going to be the location of the seam of the texture map. And I know a number of you get texture mapped, right? It's going to happen. We can't avoid it. What we can do, however, is choose where those seams are going to be. Okay? Now, based on what you can see from my screen here, where's probably a good location to put the seam of our texture, front or the back of our model? Sure about that? It's the front. What tells you it's the front, Carlos? Yeah, don't forget your compass. I love the compass. Okay, the compass is my friend, and specifically what we're talking about is this guy right down there, the compass. Okay, the orientation of our compass is going to remind us as to the positive orientation of all the XYZ axes in our three-dimensional direction that positive axis is. Okay. So the direction that you see all the letters kind of tells you which direction, or which positive direction that axis is. So right now, the selected edge on my wine barrel matches the positive Z axis, or the positive Z direction within inside of our three-dimensional space, right? The positive Z is an important location within our three-dimensional scene, because what does it represent? The front. Absolutely. Positive Z is the front of our scene. So inversely, negative Z would be the back of our scene. Okay? I don't know about you guys, but 9 times out of 10, whenever I'm designing something in 3D, I very rarely see the back of things, right? We often show the front of all of our models. So where's a better place to put the seam for our texture? At the back. Yeah, Austin's got it. Okay? Along the back of our model as the starting point for the UV Unwrap tool. Okay? Please make sure when you're using the UV Unwrap tool that it goes the full length of your wine barrel. Some of you guys stopped into my office hours earlier this week, and some of you guys had some issues surrounding this edge selection. Now, in my mind, whenever I'm selecting an edge in conjunction with the UV Unwrap tool, I'm kind of like being like, a crazy plastic surgeon. And that edge represents kind of like the scalpel line where I'm going to cut my model and lay it flat on the ground, okay? So I'm going to slice my model, and we're not actually slicing, it's a metaphorical slice, okay? We're going to slice my model along that line. All right, let's do it real fast. Let me change my viewport here a little bit so that I can minimize my OpenGL and really get access to the most important part, my UV editor. So let's fire off the unwrap tool, and I'm going to left click and drag. Now also, don't forget to drag, drag, drag. Now I'm getting a really wacky, weird, inconsistent result, and let's explore why. Some of you guys had some problems last week, and this is a problem that mirrors some of the issues that you came up with. Like most of the tools inside of Modo, UV Unwrap has some really, really, really important options that we need to dial in order for us to get an accurate result. Okay? Specifically, there is one that people often miss and they overlook, and it's this one: the initial projection type. What is the initial shape of my wine barrel? A cylinder. Yet my computer is set up to have the initial projection type be a sphere. So UV Unwrap is kind of thinking that my shape that I'm unwrapping is spherical, and it's basing its options, its rules on that assumption. Let's change it real fast. Excuse me. Let's change it real fast and check it out. See if we get a different result. Okay. Here's a power user trick. Okay. I'm not a big fan of hitting undo while the tool is still on, because you can hit undo for a while, okay? Here's what I often do, okay? If I want to kind of reset my tool and do that operation over again, I drop the tool, okay? And then I hit undo once. Whoop. Or, okay, it's going to make a liar out of me twice in this particular situation, all right? So let's change the initial projection type to cylinder. Left click and drag. And it's still not giving me a really fantastic result. Let me just keep going here. I'm just left clicking and dragging, left clicking and dragging, left clicking and dragging. Really what we're doing when we're left clicking and dragging with the UV Unwrap tool is that we're interactively changing that iterations value. So you can kind of jump to the head of the line, if you will, by numerically entering in some crazy high value. Okay? So for example, if I just put 2,000 iterations, hit the return key, the computer's going to think about it for a second and automatically update the tool. There we go, and give us that. So if you don't like left clicking and dragging, I saw a couple folks over in the lab doing this last week where they're like abusing their mouse, where they're like left click, slam their mouse down, and drag, slam, and slam. Be careful. Be gentle with your mice, okay? Be gentle. I mean, they're very delicate little pieces of machinery, all right? So the iterations value is a great way to quickly go through the UV unwrapping stage without having to left click and drag a bazillion times, okay? Now mine it's better. It's still not perfect though, right? The other things that I often try to look around at inside of the UV unwrap options are this initial projection axis, okay? Right now we're projecting the UV unwrap tool down by the y-axis. If we change it to like X, better result, okay? Compare Y, which has some pretty big waves in there, okay, to the x-axis. Much better. We don't have all those waves. Good, good, good. This is what we are after. This is what we're looking for. I'm pretty happy with this result. It's not perfect by any account, but it's definitely something that's usable. Spacebar to drop the tool, and let's start looking at what we need to do next in order for us to texture this correctly over in Photoshop. So what's next here? Yeah, why are we going to turn it?
Because
why can't we just leave it like this?
put a image on it.
Yeah. Again, this is another consideration that we have to be mindful of going forward, because I need to be designing my UVs in order for us to texture this correctly in Photoshop. So in every stage of the game, you need to be thinking, okay, how in the world am I going to do this in Photoshop? Okay? How am I going to do this in Photoshop? Waddell?
I was going to ask a question. Kind of have a little issue with unwrapping my UV. It just constantly giving me these weird unwraps.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at it. I want to switch the computer monitor back, or the projector back over to my computer, and let's take a look at Waddell's wine barrel, and let's see what's going on. Now, Waddell, I like what you have going on here. You're getting some really good edge selections. However, keep going with your iterations. Yeah, keep left clicking and dragging. You're only at 325 iterations. It flattens out. Interesting. Okay, do me a favor. Zoom out a little bit here, Waddell. Drop your tool. Yeah, drop your tool and hit undo. Let's get rid of that UV. There we go. Drop your tool again so we don't accidentally reapply it. And let's just take a look, see at what you got going on. Okay, what about the bottom? Show me the bottom. Okay. All right. Let's select that edge one more time, and let's go through the process of unwrapping this wine barrel. Double click. Perfect. UV unwrap. Left click and drag, and you're getting a flat line. Okay. Now, this is... Whoops. At times, this can produce, this is not an uncommon issue. And Waddell, I'm going to just take over for 2 seconds because I want to show some peeps here an alternative to what we can do. So let me take over. I'm going to drop your tool here, and we're going to look at this yet again. And I can see why your zoom isn't working at all, and I don't know why. Maybe it's your computer. He was doing this to you over in the computer lab. Interesting. Where the zoom, the control key just fundamentally wasn't working, huh? It zooms in, but doesn't zoom out. Okay, interesting. Let's see, something's changed then. Very quickly, look right here in the interface, okay? That number is an important one, okay? That number, and I don't know if you guys can see it. Let me change the projector back over to my computer screen here so you can see what I'm talking about, okay? That number in the bottom right-hand corner of our OpenGL interface is really, really important, okay? Mine says 50 cm. cm stands for centimeters, okay? This is a unit of measurement for each grid square on our grid, right? I have my grid turned off at the moment just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see my viewport, excuse me. So let me hit the O key, go to visibility, turn on my grid, and if you look carefully, each one of these grid squares in here is now 1 meter in size, okay? Modo has this really cool system that allows us, that changes the size of our grid square based on the orientation and perspective of our camera within the scene, okay? Waddell, if you looked at his, okay, 50K, okay, let's go back to his monitor real fast, okay? His says 50 kilometers. Each grid square is 50 kilometers. Your barrel is like bigger than the Empire State Building right now, okay? It's humongous. It's ginormous. We got to make it a little bit smaller, okay? Here, I want you to do one other thing, Waddell, and this is just purely to tickle my curiosity, okay? Go to the very top of the screen where it says View and your pull-down menus.
Oh, well, you make control backs. I can't.
Oh, well, I'll do it then. So if we go to View, check it out. We have this Dimensions tool, and it's going to tell us how big our object is. Okay. This is awesome, because I don't even know what this is. Because if you look at the labels, it says 1.9189 mm. I'm going to assume that's like megameter. I don't know. What is larger than a kilometer in the metric unit? I really don't know. Regardless, it's massive. It's huge. It's huge. Okay, you're really interested to hear what mm stands for. It's not millimeter. It's a capital M Lowercase m. Millimeter would be lowercase, lowercase, right?
Yeah, it's a megameter.
Megameter. Another reason why the entire world should go to the metric unit of measurement. Because you have a unit that's called a megameter. That's awesome, you know? Inches and feet just seem so boring now in comparison to a megameter, right? Anyways, okay, so Waddell, we need to scale this object down and your zoom may come back.
Yeah.
So let's just do it real fast. And I'm just going to scale this down. Shoot, we'll do it. Yeah, we'll just scale it down. Teeny, tiny, tiny. There we go. And now, let's see. We can zoom in. We can zoom out. So I think in many ways you have just hit the limit of the Moto scene, which I didn't know there was one, to be entirely honest with you. It was 1.189 megameters, which is pretty big. And we're going to center your object around the origin of the scene. Now, each one of our grid squares in Waddell's scene is 2 kilometers, so we're getting better. If we change the action center to origin and continue to scale this object down, we're just going to make it teeny tiny. Oops. Scale is something that we're going to be talking about here soon inside of the 3D, the game art pipeline. Scale is actually really important. Don't want to negatively scale it. All right, that's close. That's closer because now each grid square is 50 millimeters. Okay, or 500 millimeters. Excuse me. So that's a little bit better. And now, Waddell, check it out. You can zoom in. You can zoom out. Woo! Okay, let's go back to your UV mapping problem because really that's what we're here to solve is that little issue. Waddell has done a really great job of creating the UVs for the top and the bottom of his shape. However, this issue in here remains the same. Now, the unwrap tool really likes it if we select the opening on the top and the bottom of our cylinder. In doing so, we're kind of creating like a little border for the computer. We're creating a kind of almost an extents. We're telling the computer that it doesn't need to evaluate this shape outside of this border, and it just seems to work better from time to time. Cylinder, let's choose the initial projection axis to be X, and it's still no likey what you got going on. Okay, let's do one more thing, okay? I want to select your geometry, and I'm going to do a mesh cleanup. Yeah, there was a bazillion floating vertices on your mesh, 1-point vertices. Actually, specifically, there was 144 of them. That may have been your problem. Mesh cleanup magically fixes a lot of different things. Let's try, yeah, that was it. Yep, and now look at your result, Waddell. There it is, much, much better. Yeah, well, let's investigate that little spot. What part of the model is that? Those two guys in there. Okay. All right. We can fix that here coming up. All right? All right. Back at you. Okay. So let's continue on, shall we? Okay. So here's mine. My UV island's looking okay, but it's not perfect. As we were talking before, we often create a really nice high resolution object for our 3D model. Okay, so the current orientation of this UV island is going to make it very difficult for us to texture this thing over in Photoshop. Okay, yeah.
I'm noticing that I'm getting the same problem. I'm noticing your edges kind of taper out.
Yeah, not perfect, right? So let's talk about how we can adjust this model to make it perfect. Because if you remember from our earlier conversation, we want to have, as close as humanly possible, a perfect little grid here, where all of these little edges are perfectly horizontal and perfectly vertical in relationship to the orientation of our UV grid. So the first thing we got to do is do a little orient pieces here. We'll set it to auto, and it did a pretty good job. One other thing that I personally like to do, is to ensure that the top of our UV island matches the top of our model. Okay? Just a simple selection will face positive Y. So I need to ensure that all of this information is also facing kind of north, if you will, on my UV map. Just makes it a little bit easier to visually consume the UVs and move forward. All right. Still not what we're after, though. Not perfect. I think now, as Dylan pointed out, I'm getting a lot of distortions. All of this stuff in here is no bueno, okay? And we're certainly not getting straight lines. So let's talk about some strategies, some new tools, if you will, that will help us create more perfect UV maps for our little wine barrel, okay? If you look closely, there is a little tapering. It's kind of curving out to the bottom. And there's a little bit of an inconsistency in all the lines. There's a wave in there. The right side of my UV map is definitely different than the left side. And specifically what I'm talking about are all of these. That angle, the angle of the curvature of the mesh on that side is different from that one over there. Let me show you a really great tool that you can use to help kind of iron out some of these problems. And in my mind, that's kind of like what we're doing here. We're taking a metaphorical iron and we're running it over the top of our mesh. And it's called UV Relax. I like UV Relax. It requires a polygonal selection. And if you go over to your UV toolbar, you can see it's under the spread category of tools. It's that guy right there. Okay? And if we run the tool, it behaves kind of similarly to that of UV Unwrap, where we left click and drag. Now, right now I have 1,800 iterations, so it's thinking, it's going to process this operation for a couple seconds, which is why I've got the beach ball of doom. So we're just going to let it sit and think about it for a second, okay? And we'll see how it's done. Now, what it's trying to do in that operation is that it's comparing the orientation of all of your UVs to their 3D counterpart over here on the right. Okay? And it's trying to, distort them to make them look as close as we can. Okay? Still not perfect. We have some work. UV Unwrap is a magical tool, but it's not the silver bullet. At times you're going to get you're going to get results that are not too different. So, if UV Relax doesn't give you the results that you're after, time to do some manual UV alignment. And this is where you turn on Pandora, you plug your headphones in, and you start to get ready to do some monkey work, because it is grunt work for the next 15, 20 minutes. I have to go in order for me to get each one of my edges on my UV map aligned perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical. I have to go in and align each one of them independently. Okay? It's a massive pain in the rear end. It's not a whole lot of fun. You're doing the exact same thing like 2,000 times in the course of 15 minutes. So it is monkey work, okay? But let's just go in and do it. Let me show you what we're going to be doing. You want to pick a direction. Oh, actually, uh-oh. I should know better. I tried to do a very computationally intense operation while I'm live streaming, and I'm still getting the beach ball of doom. I've gotten reports back from the lab that whenever I do something really insane, the stream generates like a 10-second delay. The audio and the video kind of get disconnected. So, oh, we're back. Okay, so hopefully that doesn't happen here. No. Okay, I want to drop the tool. Whenever I get the beach ball of doom, go grab a cup of coffee. Just let it come back, let it think, let it do its thing. Okay? A lot of people think that whenever you get the beach ball of doom, or the pinwheel of death, depending on who you describe or who you talk to, that your computer has crashed. That's not the case on the Mac. Whenever you see that pinwheel or the beach ball, your computer hasn't crashed. Your computer is just thinking. Okay? It's processing a command. So just let it do its thing. Let it process the command, and then you can come back later and continue to work. And unfortunately, I may be in a situation where I have to rebake. Yep. All right, to keep the conversation going, I'm just going to force quit my Moto. Yep, this is what happens when you try to live stream and do something really intense all at the same time. All right. Yes. All right, let's go back into my UV window and see what we can see. No, okay. I gotta bear with me just for 2 seconds. Luckily, let's duplicate it. I'm gonna clear my UV map. And let's just do it real fast. Yep. Do. This is where I would really love to have like a live streaming production assistant, because I'd give them the indiscreet cue to play like elevator music for like the live stream. Dun 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 dun, while I redo what I was just doing. That's going to be live streaming 2.0. There we go. Thank you, Carlos. As always, thinking 2 steps ahead. Okay. All right, just left clicking and dragging using a little UV unwrap here. Let's jump to the head of the line and just put my iterations up to 1500, and there we go. Let's do it even more. Let's put it up to 2000. Generally, my golden rule whenever I'm using UV unwrap is don't stop dragging your mouse button until the UVs stop moving. Oops, okay, so let's do horizontal on my orient, and let's just confirm that what we got up here is the top of the mesh, and it is, and we're back to where we were. Okay, so welcome to your worst nightmare. Manually aligning all of these edges. Now, you're working on a low polygon object, so this really isn't that bad. Unfortunately, today I've brought in the high polygon version of this object, and I have a bazillion, and I mean a bazillion edges that I have to go in and now adjust, because I have edges for subdivision surfacing on my model, so I got a bunch of them. But basically what we're going to be trying to do here is take this line, okay, this line in here, that top edge, and we're going to try to make it into a straight line, something like that, okay, automatically. We want the computer to do this for us. You want to pick a direction and then go that direction for the duration of this next operation. So what I'm saying is don't do like a whole bunch of horizontal ones and then change over here and start doing these and then do horizontal for a bit. Don't do that, okay? Do all the horizontal ones and then go back and do all the vertical ones, okay? So let's just do it. Selecting the top ones, the border ones are the most difficult because you can't double click on it. If you double click on it, you select the entire border of your UV island. Don't do that, okay? However, this is why we have a UV window over here. I can double click that border that border edge, and you can see that just that top row has been selected. So I need to align that edge to itself and make it perfectly vertical. If you've been wondering what these big green arrows are over in the UV toolbar, these are alignment tools, and what this is going to do is it's going to examine every single vertex along the selected edge and align them to a common point. So what is that common point? How does the computer understand where within our V axis to place these edges? It's not the nearest closest grid line, but I like the way you're thinking. It's going to analyze the highest vertice on that edge, okay? So it's going to very quickly go through, scan all of the vertices that I've selected, pick the one that's the highest along that axis or that has the greatest value, and align everything to that. And for me, it's going to be this corner one. Okay, it's going to be that one right there. Now watch what happens to my edge the moment I click on the Align Vertical button or Align Up. Boom. Okay, check it out. They all are perfectly straight now. And now, this is where you turn on Pandora, because you double click, Align Vertical. Grab the next one. There is not. You can make one though. Double click, up, double click, up, and it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm not going to go through and do this in front of you. This would take 5 minutes. I know it is a tremendous amount of monkey work, but it's only 5 minutes of time, and what you get, the product of this operation, is going to be a perfect UV map, okay? So it's definitely worth your time and definitely worth your energy. We need to do this along two different directions. We do it horizontally, and we got to do it vertically. So check it out for the vertical one. We're going to do the exact same thing, and we're going to start with the edges, the border. So I'm going to go in, select that one, that one, that one, that one. It's use your arrow keys to make this process go a little bit faster. So I'm hitting the up arrow key, and it's just grabbing the next one in the row. And it's just going to cruise all the way down to the bottom here. Tapping the arrow key a bazillion times now. Just make sure your selection doesn't curve across the bottom like it is there. And now we're going to align to the left. Pick a direction, go that way across the entire mesh. And you'll maintain all the spacing and the proportions of your polygons across the surface of your UVs. Okay? This one's a little bit easier. And the proportions of all of the polygons are correct. So we kind of have to find the halfway point. In the easy, you could if you wanted to. You could. It's not going to be a huge problem because we can always go back and fix it. What I often do to find the horizontal, the center edge, is to select the border. It represents the center of our mesh. So I just know that that one's going to go left, that one's going to go left, that one can go left, and now all others are going to go right. Okay? Or they can go left, and then you can just adjust it later. Okay? Not the end of the world. What we're ultimately trying to get here is just really consistent polygons across the surface of our mesh. Okay? What do you mean flip back and forth between two? You could, absolutely. That works too. Whatever is easier for your brain to decode, I say do it. Okay? And at the end of the day, after you're done doing all of this, you're going to get a UV map that looks like that. Okay? That's the goal. And what I've done on this bottom UV map is ultimately I've vertically and horizontally aligned all of the edges to each other, and I've got a pretty consistent and fantastic distortion-free result. Yeah, Waddell, what's up?
Okay, when I'm trying to fix my UV, I'm trying to fix the line of my UV, and right now it's like when I change the right now I'm working on the size of the UV. When I change, when I tell it to go to the left or right, it just like it completely overlaps the whole UV.
Show me.
Like
Yeah, okay. That makes sense because you're doing up and down, right?
Yeah.
Now, also, look at what is selected on your UV. You get both edges selected, the topmost one and the bottommost one. Deselect the other one. So if Waddell, if you were to double click on that border, it's going to select both of them, right? Because what we have there is, those two edges are the same edge. They're just on the opposite side of the UV. So there's a couple strategies that you can employ to just select the edge that you're after. Okay? You can double click on them. That's fine. Double click on it for me. Or, I'm sorry, double click on the edge on the mesh itself. There you go. Now, hold down your control key and just drag out a box around the one below. That's going to deselect it. Yeah. Remember, holding down control will deselect those edges. Okay. All right. While you continue to work on that, let's talk about a couple other things real fast. Oops, excuse me, didn't mean to go that one. Okay, a couple other strategies here. Does anyone want to take a stab at what this detail is? Yeah, those little bolts, the rivets that are running down the side of my wine barrel. Why are they all red like this? Say again? They're all on top of each other. Why did I put them all on top of each other? They are the exact same thing. And strategically, this is a very small detail. Okay? Are you going to be able to see the difference between all of these different rivets from 2 or 3 feet away? No. So do we need to texture them individually? No. They can all share the exact same texture. You'll never, ever see the differences between all of them. Okay? It would only make the process of creating, this texture map more difficult in Photoshop if they were all separated out. Okay? So stacking these UVs is okay. It's legit. It's allowed. It's another one of those things that another one of those elements that we have to think, 8 or 9 steps down the line. Okay? Questions? All right, let's take a break, and we'll talk about Photoshop after the break. Okay? Let's take a break. The nearest place to buy a soda with a screw cap, that would be in the technology building, or if you go into T107, that's a little hallway where you go into the restrooms there. There's a soda machine in there, and a snack machine now too.
Wait, the technology building, is that one over there?
Yep.
Where the tech lab is?
You got it. T107. Yeah. Hold on 2 seconds. Okay. All right. Let's get back to it, shall we, folks? All right. Okay, so for our illustration today, yeah.
I noticed that you subdivide your barrel. Is that?
No, you don't want to do this. That's not allowed for this class. Yeah, this is just this is the model file that I used for some artwork that I did for this class a while ago, and so it's just, huh?
Did you subdivide it?
I did, yeah. Because I wanted a pretty render. That's all. For everything in this class, you're not going to be doing subdivision surfaces. So, all right. Except for the dice. The dice was the only thing that you were allowed to subdivide. That's it. So hopefully you got it all out of your system and you're on your way. All right. So, a couple things before we go too much further. I mentioned earlier that hitting that magical export button is the point of no return. So we need to have our stuff dialed and perfect and ready to go before we export our UVs over into Photoshop. I love the UV checker material preset. I recognize that some of these machines don't have that checker preset installed, but let me show you what I'm going to do here. I want to grab all those polygons, just throw them into a material called test. Then over in my shader tree, I'm going to just have my group selected, hit the F6 key, and I've already navigated my preset browser to the UV checker preset. I use this preset so much that, well, it's like the first thing that's always in my browser, okay? Because I'm constantly going in. However, if you don't know where it is, it's in your materials library, and then it's under miscellaneous UV checker. It's a great little preset. If my material group is already selected in my shader tree, double-clicking on my preset will apply that preset to that group. Let's go check it out. Oops, looks like I didn't double-click on it. My tablet's coming back to haunt me here. Here we go. Now we don't see the material on my model. Why? What do I need to change? The texture locator, absolutely. Pop quiz. What does the texture locator do? Not really, actually. Sorry, Dylan. Yeah, it really doesn't. Well, I guess kind of in an existential way, it does locate your texture, right? But really what it's responsible for doing is placing your texture on top of your surface, right? On your actual 3D model. On the correct UV map, absolutely. So with my texture selected in my shader tree, I can explore its texture locator by clicking on my Properties tab and then navigating over to the texture locator vertical tab on the right-hand side of my Properties window. So texture locator, and what we need to just double check, yeah, here's my problem. The projection type is correct. It should be UV map, but look down here. It doesn't know which UV map to grab. So I'm going to do barrel high, rock and roll, and we can see that the texture has now interactively been mapped across the surface of my mesh. Okay? And this is looking pretty decent. I'm happy with it. The things that I'm looking for specifically across the surface of my geometry is I want to make sure that all of the grid squares, so I'm looking at the actual squares here, all of these guys are kind of uniform in size and shape. Some distortions are okay. It's going to happen. It's not always going to be perfect, but we want to try to make it as perfect as we can. I always double check, triple check, quadruple check my UVs before I send them out. We can see a little bit of stretching here along this plane, but I'm happy with it. I can live with it, okay? For this simple example, this isn't so bad, okay? All right, now that I have checked my object, I'm ready to get these UVs out of Modo and into Photoshop so I can work with a custom, or so I can create a custom diffuse texture map for this guy. So how do I do it? How do I get it out? Texture. Then where? Export UVs. Now, before we hit that Export UV button, let's triple check some important selections inside the application. Okay. Primarily, there are two things that I always ensure I have selected before I go. I have the item selected and the correct UV map selected. So just make sure that both of those things are ready to go, are selected before you go to the top of the screen and find texture in the pull-down menus. So here we go. There's texture. Then export UVs to EPS. Okay, let's do it real fast. It's going to ask me for a name. I'll give you a little secret into my own personal production workflow. I always append my file name with UVs, just so I know that this file contains just UV information. It's not a diffuse texture map. It's not something that will ultimately end up in Modo. It's just UV. That's all it is. And I want to put it right on my desktop and hit the return key to save it. All right, so we're done in Modo for the time being. Let's jump back over into Photoshop and start working with this element inside that environment. Everything that I'm doing inside of Photoshop can be done in like version 2 of Photoshop. Okay, I'm really not leveraging any of the new kind of tools and features inside of Photoshop 6 or even Photoshop CC. I'm an old school texture artist, so a lot of my core technique relies on some of the core features that are found inside of Photoshop. Let's open up that texture file. Here's a great little trick. There's my texture file sitting right there on my desktop. Here's kind of a cool little trick. If you just drag that icon, that file, on top of the Photoshop icon in your dock, it will open that file for you automatically. Once Photoshop begins to open up that file, I don't think I quite follow you, Dylan. What computer number are you? Keep going. CM110, it's going to be a student number. Number 10. So this is yours right here. Yep. Come on. That one's yours, right? Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, this is kind of one of those things that we have to consider, okay? Because the lids are at the bottom of your UV map, you're also not using the UV map to map this guy on there, right? Or are you? Go to your texture locator for me in your shader tree. Is it the wood one? Is it the correct UV map? Yeah, okay. So you didn't create this Photoshop or this texture over in Photoshop, right? No. So we want to do this in Photoshop. We just don't want to grab a tiny texture off of CT Textures and start working with it. We want to make all this in Photoshop, and the resolution to your issue can easily be done in Photoshop just by doing a simple transformation of the image, okay? Basically, we're going to rotate it, all right, in Photoshop. Now, don't do export as. You trying to export your UVs? Yeah. So go to Texture. There we go. Export UVs to EPS. Yes, yes, yes. There we go. Good job. Okay. Let's get back to this prompt instead of Photoshop. There are 3 things that I need to change. What are they?
Size.
Size. So 2 of them.
It is the pixel and the size.
I love it. Great job, Tomoko. So the first thing that we need to change is the unit of measurement that we're using to create this document. So I want to change it to pixels, okay? For both the width and the height. That's the first thing that we got to change. What's the second thing that we got to change?
The RGB color.
Right. So the mode is going to go from CMYK to RGB. The third thing that we're going to change is the actual pixel dimensions of this image. Last week we talked about the pixel dimensions that our industry uses. Does anyone remember what they are? So 256 by 256, okay? 512, Tomoko? 1024. What's the next one up? 2048, yep, you got it, okay? These are all the pixel dimensions of the texture files that our industry standardly creates, okay? Believe it or not, our industry has standardized around very few things. The texture size is one of them, okay? And if you look very carefully at the texture sizes that we're using, they're all divisible by 2, okay? So by if we were to divide 2048 in half, we'd get 1024. And if we were to divide that in half, we get 512, and so on and so forth. Okay?
Now, Pat, when we export our UVs, is it important that we have that frame size the same as?
Doesn't matter. The frame size is a camera operation, or it's a component of the camera operation. So the frame size is independent from the UVs. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
So, you told us that the 1024 is a common number, but
Yeah.
what's the difference to 2048?
Yeah.
Is that the 24 data file?
Well, and Tomoko brings up a really good question. I think the answer to this question is really one of a personal preference. There's nothing that says you can't author your texture at 2048 by 2048 and then scale it down in the computer to 1024 by 1024. That's okay. Okay. The power of this system being divisible by 2 is that it's very, very easy for us to downgrade the quality so that we can optimize the performance of our game. For example, if we have, like 100 different game characters all cruising around a multiplayer level at the same time, we want our game engine to reduce the quality of those textures interactively to retain a very high frame rate. Okay? Opposed to when it's just me by myself in my environment, I want to be looking at the higher resolution textures because there's not as much happening in the scene for the computer to process. So I'm a big fan, actually, of authoring at higher resolutions and then downsizing my image to meet whatever my needs are. I think that's a really flexible workflow. I know a lot of folks that author in 2048 by 2048, and then they use that downsizing system to move everything down in size and in quality as well. So I find for the most part, 1024 is kind of the minimum. Okay? But authoring at 2048 is not a bad idea. I author almost everything at 2048. Okay. So for everything that we're going to do in here, I'm just going to ask you guys to do it at 1024 by 1024. A 1K texture is a great starting point for the projects in this class. It's going to produce a Photoshop file size that is not gigantic, because once you start getting into the 2048 by 2048 world, your Photoshop documents can balloon into something quite large and at times unmanageable. Okay, 1024, great starting point. Okay. Okay, let's hit the OK button and start working on our texture. Okay, so Photoshop has opened up our texture. There it is. Now the first thing that I want you guys to get into the habit of doing is saving your Photoshop texture. Okay, now we don't want to hit File, Save, right? Why not? What's going to happen if we were just to hit File, Save? Yeah, it's going to overwrite the .eps file, right? An EPS file is an encapsulated PostScript file. In layman's terms, it's a vector image, right? Just a whole bunch of lines, paths, wires, if you will, okay? It's not a file format that really understands the role and the editability of layers and pixels, okay? What file format do we want to get our texture file into as soon as humanly possible? PSD, the Photoshop document, which is why doing a file save as is the most important thing to do the moment you open up your file. File save as. And once again, I'm going to give you kind of a little window into my own personal production pipeline. So Pat's Barrel is going to be the name of my project. However, I don't want my file name to include UVs, right? Because this is more than just the UVs. Now we're working on a diffuse texture map, okay? So here's what I do. Whenever I'm developing the naming convention for my files, I often start with the most general description of that project and then get more specific as we go down the file name. So the most general description of my project is Pat's Barrel, okay? Well, now we want to start describing the contents of this document. Well, what is it? Well, it's a texture file. So I put TEX in there for texture. Well, what type of texture? Well, it's going to be a diffuse texture file. So I always put diff. This is foreshadowing some stuff that we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about other types of texture maps that we can use both in Modo and in our game engine to create a higher quality result. For example, we're going to be talking about specular maps and reflection maps and bump maps to a certain degree to get some really cool effects. Okay? So we're going to start off by making a diffuse texture map. And I'm just going to put it on my desktop for the time being, and then hit the return key to rock and roll. All right, now that we're in a Photoshop texture or Photoshop document, I can begin working with, working inside of Photoshop. And the first thing that I almost always do is change the names of the layers that I'm working on. This is layer 1. If you yeah, Rebecca, go ahead. Okay, yours isn't showing. Rebecca, what computer number are you? 20. Let's see if we can find 20. For whatever reason, they're not alphabetically organized on my screen. 20. That's kind of fun. Okay, let's do this. 20. Okay, check out Rebecca's screen here real fast. This is kind of neat. Well, it's not kind of neat, but it's a problem that you can run into, especially in this environment. We're working in an open lab who's, and the photography students use this lab in the mornings. Our class started late today because of those damn photography students. No, I'm joking. I love our photography students. I didn't just say that. Okay. Well, they often change Photoshop for their workflow. So what we need to do is restore it back to how we want to use Photoshop. So Rebecca, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the top of the screen where it says Window, okay, and then Workspace, and I want you to let's do Reset Essentials. There she blows. Okay, you're on your way. Okay. All right. So I'm on the right-hand side in my Layers palette, and I've zoomed in so I can working inside of Photoshop. You're going to want to name all of your layers, okay? UVs. Now, it looks like on the surface that there's nothing on that layer, right? It's very, very difficult to see, but there's actually small 1-pixel lines that match the outlines of our UV map. They're just incredibly difficult to see and read, right? So what suggestion did I make last week?
Double-click the empty space next to the layer and stroke.
Yeah, absolutely. So double-clicking on the empty space on this layer is going to apply what's called a layer style. And the one that I like to do is called stroke, which is just a fancy computer graphics term for outline. Okay, and some people ran into this problem last week. When you first start working with the layer styles, it's going to look like this. Okay, and some folks were just hitting the check mark like that. Okay, well, if you click on the word stroke, you can see that that option is now highlighted, and we get all of the stroke options in the center of that window. I almost always make the size of my stroke about 1 pixel, and I also try to make it a really obnoxious color so that it's very easy to see. For me, bright purple is something that's pretty obnoxious. You can see a bright purple outline around all of my objects. All right, pretty cool. There we go. All right, so let's start working with some photographs. We want to base all of our textures in photographs. Why? Photographs look pretty real, man. Absolutely. And we want our image maps, our texture files, to achieve that sense of photorealism. Okay. So photographs are really what we want to use as the foundation for our model. Where can we find some really rockin' photographs? Online for free. CG Textures. Absolutely. Please use CG Textures. Oops, I put a hyphen in there for some reason. I'm thinking of the blueprints. It's just CG Textures, all one word. Here it is. I love CG Textures. I've been a user at CG Textures for a long, long time. It really is the best and the best place to go for free online stuff. Okay, use it, register. I don't think you're going to be disappointed in it. Now, I've already kind of done the work for you guys, and I have a whole bunch of files on my machine of some textures or some photographs that I'm going to use for this guy or for my little project here. And as you can see, I organize everything. Here's the cool thing. If you start working with CG Textures, save all the files that you download from CG Textures. After a while, you will have accumulated this huge library of texture information, and you'll get to a point where you're like me, I very rarely download anything from CG Textures anymore because I have all of my favorite files saved on my hard drive. This isn't the hard drive that has everything. This is actually just kind of my all-stars, if you will. On my home Mac, I have gigabytes upon gigabytes upon gigabytes of free textures. Yeah, it happens. It happens a lot. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to find some planks here that have some interest. I'm always looking for interesting textures on the web. Whenever I find something that looks interesting to me, I always save it to my computer and save it. What I'm ultimately looking for in the quality of my textures is our world is not perfectly clean, right? Very few things are clean and pristine and perfect. Seemingly the only things in our world that are perfect are the things that you find at the Apple Store, right? It kind of looks like, yeah, it does, right? It's like, it looks like one of those clean rooms that you see on like the old Intel commercials, right? Everything else is dirty, it's beat up, it's been influenced by the weather. So I like to have that kind of detail and character in all the textures that I create. So let's find something here that's workable. As you can see, I have textures for just about everything. All right, here we go. Now we're into something. Old wooden planks. We're going to use that one. That's a good one to start with. I'm going to open that one up in Photoshop, and this is going to be the foundation for the texture file for almost the entirety of my little wine barrel. Okay. Now, last week we simply talked about the process of like dragging and dropping layers from one Photoshop document into another, right? Because I want to use this as the foundation for my wine barrel. Okay. This is what we talked about last week. I have a whole bunch of open documents, and how do I get all of this texture information, all of this stuff in here, oops, excuse me, into that one over there? Outside of copy and pasting it, how can we do it? How did we do it last week? Something easier than that.
Drag the layer from that section to the...
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dylan. So I have this open document, right? The contents for this document is in that layer right here. Well, if I just drag that layer into my Photoshop texture and let go, it's going to merge those two documents. That's okay. I don't want all three of those planks. Okay, this actually isn't going to serve my purpose at all. Okay, I want to have portions of it. So this is going to be an extension of what we talked about last week. FYI, I need to delete this layer, and if you're a mouse person like me, the fastest way to delete this layer is just to drag and drop it to the bottom of your layers palette into the little trash can. That's a fun one. I like that one. Okay. Let me show you a new technique, and this is kind of expanding on what B was talking about earlier. Photoshop works on this idea of selections. Whatever is selected is going to be changed. If nothing is selected, everything is going to be changed. Does that sound familiar to you guys? Yeah. Yeah, Modo takes its entire selection system from Photoshop. Okay? So we're going to do something that's similar in nature to what we've been doing over in Modo for a long, long time. I'm going to make a selection. So I want to go back to my wood planks, and I want to find some interesting information here in my wood planks. Okay? I'm cruising through. I love this Photoshop, or I love this texture, because if you look really carefully at it, there's some really interesting things in here. It's got a lot of dirt. There's some nail holes in here. There's some staining. There's chips that are taken off of it. This is a texture that has a lot of character. I like this. So what I'm going to start off with is making a selection, because I only want to have portions of this texture included in my wine barrel, not all of it. Over on the left-hand side of Photoshop, you can see that we have this crazy long toolbar, and this toolbar has been around since day one in Photoshop, and it's been built upon for many, 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 many years. But at the core, going all the way back to version 1, is that tool that's selected there, the marquee selection tool. You're going to find that a majority of the things that we're going to be doing today is going to include the marquee selection tool, so this one, and then this guy. What's this one right above it? Yeah, absolutely. So this, oops. Okay, maybe not. Maybe I won't draw on it. This one is our selection tool, And you're right, this is going to be our move tool. So I want to start off with my move tool. And check it out. In my source texture, I only want that part right there. It's an interesting little chunk, okay? With that part selected, check it out. I can go back to the move tool and just move it from one document into another. And you can see that what's been copied over into my Photoshop texture is identical to what I selected in the other one, okay? It's a great, great, great little trick. If we examine our original source material, nothing's been deleted. Everything is still there, okay? So what do I need to do to this texture file in here, or that layer in here? Yeah, we got to adjust it to the right dimension. Specifically what, Carlos?
Along the stabs of the burn.
Yeah, so I need to rotate it. I need to rotate this little file 90 degrees so that the wood grain of my little, what I'm trying to create here is a little slat, okay? So that my wood grain matches the wood grain on the actual object, okay? So I need to rotate it 90 degrees. How do we do this? Yeah, I love it. And we got to hit the move tool is not going to give us what we want, okay? But hitting free transformations or applying the free transformation tool by having the layer selected, top of the screen where it says edit, free transformation, keyboard shortcut Command T. This is one that you'll absolutely want to commit to memory because you're going to be doing this a lot. Now once we have the free transformation tool active, see how my little cursor here? Yes. When my cursor's in the center, I can move this layer around. But when it's outside, see how my cursor changes? Little rotation guy. Now I can rotate it. If you hold down the Shift key, it's going to rotate it in 15-degree increments. Okay, rock and roll. Now I probably also need to make this a little bit smaller. So let's do the exact same thing again. Command T to activate my free transformations. And I want to scale this down so that it approximately is the size that we want. Okay? Yeah. Okay, Austin, show me what's going on. What computer number are you? 4? This one? Okay. Show me. Ah, okay. So go to the Move tool. You're still in the Selection tool. The Move tool. Are you still in the Move tool? Yeah. Okay. Now keep going with your mouse. Keep going until it's over there. Now let go. Click on that other one. Nothing happened. Let me try. See what's going on here. Okay. So there we go. Let's go to the Move tool. Okay. Maybe. No. Ah! Yeah, don't use the free transformation. Physically use the Move tool to take the selection from your source material and move it into that new document. Okay. Okay. So if we look back at my Photoshop document now, the free transformation tool is still working. Here's a landmine that people often miss. Whenever you're working with the free transformation tool, you have to confirm or deny your transformation from happening, okay, inside of the application. So you got to hit the little check mark up there in the upper right-hand corner. Don't forget that one. That one took me a long time to remember. You can also hit the return key on your number pad to do the same thing. Fine. I guess it's just all about you, isn't it? You just want to control your machine. Jeez, it's Austin, Austin, Austin. There you go. It's all yours, man. Sorry. I forgot. Okay, so don't forget to hit the little check mark to confirm your operation, and you're on your way. Okay? All right. A couple other Photoshop strategies that I want to look at real quick. Working inside of our Photoshop environment can be a little bit cumbersome, especially when we're trying to work with a certain degree of accuracy on our texture itself. I want to be able to very quickly go in and I want to zoom in on my layer here and position it a little bit more accurately within my document. Okay, So you can use the zoom tool. The zoom tool can be found at the bottom of your toolbar. It's the magnifying glass. Okay, it's that guy right there. And the zoom tool is kind of cool because you can just left click and you can zoom in, zoom in. You also have the hand tool here that will allow you to move around and navigate around in your document. However, I find it kind of frustrating in this current view. I have my document kind of in a floating palette, and the zoom and the hand tool, you know, they're gonna, once we kind of bump into the edges of my document, you know, that's as far as I'm going to go. I want to have this part of my document in the center of my window so I can go in and really start to edit and paint on it. Okay? So here's my little trick. I've been doing this forever. If you hit the F key, it's going to bring your Photoshop document full screen. Now, if I was to use the hand tool, check it out. I can move past the edge of my document and put that part of my texture in the center of the screen. My brain likes to work in the center of things, so this is kind of a power user trick that makes working with texture files a whole lot easier. In addition, here's another thing that we want to change. We want to change the layer order, because I want to see the placement, or how the placement of this particular wood grain pattern is going to ultimately affect the UV map that I created over in Modo. So how do I reorder my layers palette? Yeah, you got it. So here's layer 1. I'm going to drag it below UVs. That line that's showing up below that layer represents the new home, the new location of that texture file within my app. And there we go, we're on our way. Okay. I like putting my UV map, or the layer that contains all of my UV information, on top. Okay. That way I can see accurately and quickly how this little chunk is going to influence the rest of my map. Okay. And kind of start to understand where this little chunk is going to be placed on my model. Okay. And things are starting to look pretty good. Check this out. Is this allowed? Look at my wood plank texture in relationship to the borders of my UVs. Is this good? Am I cool here?
No.
Why not, Waddell?
Because it's going, like, even though it's just like off by a few inches, it's still going to, it'll like it's happened to me a couple times, it'll overlap the other UVs when it's like on the mesh, like, exactly.
So ultimately, and you're absolutely right, Waddell, ultimately this is allowed, but we have to watch it. We need to make sure that the edges of this texture, of this wood grain pattern, aren't, you know, kind of getting into the other areas of our UVs. Okay? So we can color outside the lines, if you will. We just have to be very, very careful as to the placement of all the texture information within inside of our Photoshop document. Okay? Just got to be careful. We can be a little bit sloppy, but not to the point where it's overlapping into other parts of our UVs, like this up in here. Because this guy is going to be those rivets. I don't want to see any of my wood grain pattern in my rivets. Okay. All right. The powerful thing, and kind of the really neat thing about working in a workflow like I have here, is that I can very, very quickly create a custom texture whose wood grain pattern looks different from one another. Oftentimes, people have one little chunk, and they just duplicate that layer 8 or 9 times so that it goes across the entire wine barrel, right? I like working with these selections because I get to control which parts of this file here are going to be included in my file, my actual Photoshop document. Okay, so I want to find a new chunk. I'm going to go back to my marquee selection tool, and I want to find a new chunk, a new interesting piece. This is kind of cool. I like this bit down here. So I'm just going to grab this bit. That's cool. And using the same technique that I did before, I'm simply going to grab the Move tool, drag, and drop it into my open Photoshop document behind, and then I'm on my way. Now clearly I have a couple things in here that I need to do. So I'm going to go Edit, Free Transform. I'm going to make it smaller. I'm also going to rotate it 90 degrees. Oops, somewhere right around in there. We're off to the races. Let me hit the F key, and I'm also going to zoom out. Excuse me. Here we go. Looks like I scaled it too much. That's something you kind of want to try to avoid as much as you can. You'll lose some quality if you have to scale up. You always want to scale down. All right. Now that I have two separate layers in here, we need to start talking about how to work with all these different layers and how to place them inside of our texture map to get the detail that we want. Ultimately, what I'm constructing here is the illusion of individual slats along my file, right? Individual ones. So we need to be very aware as to the seams within the texture file itself. Okay, if I turn off my UVs, you can see what I'm talking about here. Just by bumping or butting up these two layers next to each other, we're already kind of starting to get the illusion that these are two different boards. We can see that the grain doesn't match up. There's weathering cues in there that make them look like they're separate pieces. Okay, we just need to be aware of that. And we want to make sure that we're getting the illusion of separate boards as we go all the way across our mesh. Okay? Yeah. Keep snapping. So what Austin is running into is that he's got his snap on, okay? And you can turn your snap on and off by going up here to Window or View. What is it? Show. Where is it? Is it here? Oh, here we go. Snap. You can turn it on and off right there. Okay. I like having my snap on, but as Austin is running into, it's kind of hard at times to move things by 1 pixel. The arrow keys on your keyboard will nudge them 1 pixel at a time. Arrow keys. So I got my layer selected, and I'm just hitting the right arrow key, and you can see that that file is just bumping over. Okay. I saw another hand. Question? Comment? Okay, I got to make some pretty important decisions in here. If you look carefully at my texture file, you can see that I have two different wood planks. I got that one there, which I'm just turning on and off, and then I have this one here. Let's turn our UV map back on and start to see how our UVs are working in relationship to this texture file. Because what we're kind of crafting here is the illusion of individual boards. Okay. I want to have these boards kind of a uniform size and a uniform thickness going around the circumference of my wine barrel. Because if I was a cooper and I was actually making this wine barrel, they're probably all going to be the same stock, right? They're all probably going to be like 1x2s or 1x4s as we go around the barrel. So it's important that the illusion that I'm creating here with my texture has a little bit of uniformity. Each plank needs to be the same size. Is there anything on the screen right now that's going to be a good indicator as to how thick each board should be? Or that will help me? Carlos?
The UV.
Yeah, the UV map, right? I spent some time aligning all of my UVs over in Modo. Each one of these polygon rows here, or columns, is the same size. So I can use that as kind of a landmark. Maybe for mine, each board is going to be 2 polygons in thickness. So what do I need to do to this one right here, to layer number 2? What do I need to do to it? Look at my screen real fast. I need to scale it. I need to make it a little bit bigger. So with that layer selected, edit, we'll do free transform. And if I put my cursor on the border, I can just scale it out. Oops, excuse me, I accidentally clicked off of it. So at times, this pen is the bane of my existence. There we go. I'm just going to scale it until the edge of that texture map is right around there. The checkbox to confirm it, and I'm on my way. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, awesome. Let's go grab another board, because I have a lot of these that I need to make. So let's rock and roll through this real fast. I'm going to grab another selection here. Grab the Move tool. And drag that selection back down into my document. And now I can start transforming it. Free transform, we'll rotate it 90 degrees. Let's kind of place it on my document and start scaling it down so that it matches all of this. Now you can do this all in one mighty fail swoop. So I'm going to look very carefully. And I'm going to scale it, just kind of the width. There we go. And I'm on my way. Things are starting to look pretty good. If you continue to use this selection system, it goes pretty fast actually. And the result that you're going to get is going to be pretty superior to just grabbing a texture that's already has a whole bunch of planks individually created. Maybe I rotate this way. because we're going to add a certain degree of randomness in here. And we're creating a true custom texture that only exists in our project file. And that's what we want. Now I got to be very careful to make sure that this texture file does not accidentally impede into the other areas on my mesh or on my UV map. So I got to be careful here. I'm going to watch it. Let's see. Let's find another interesting little chunk here. That's pretty interesting. I like that. So I'll grab the move tool, drag and drop it into the document that's behind, do a little Command T action to transform it into place. If you hold down the Shift key while you're scaling it, it'll uniformly scale that object where we need it to go. And if you need to distort your texture like I do here, don't freak out about that. No one's ever going to know the difference, okay? The great thing about your audience is they don't have access to the original texture file, so they're not going to know. They're not going to know if the wood grain pattern is slightly different than what they had on the original. You know, a lot of people, they kind of complain to me. They're like, oh, Pat, this is so much effort. Why can't I just go grab a pre-built texture off of CG Textures? Well, you can, but this result is going to give us a tremendous amount of control over our object. Okay, and we're going to create a true custom texture here, which is what I want to have. It's going to look better. It's going to look a lot better. There we go, and we're on our way. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of this process, but you can start to see that we're creating the illusion of individual boards now. We can see the natural line, the natural kind of joint between these little planks. That's going to be very noticeable to our object, or on our object over in Modo. Okay. However, we're kind of not done yet. Okay. I would like to increase the illusion ever so slightly. So I need to start painting on this. Okay. I want to introduce you guys to the first stage of the brush tool. And I really do mean the first baby step into the world of actually doing some texture painting. Okay? My eye is telling me that whenever we have, or actually, let's look at the reference for real fast. The Photoshop or the texture that we have open in the background, I think is a really good indicator as to what we're trying to craft here. If you carefully look at the texture file that I have on the screen here, check it out. Look at this. There's some good stuff in here. Specifically, my eye is telling me that naturally there should be this huge dark line running between all the boards, right? Because no board is going to be, perfectly butt up next to the one in the row, right? There's going to be a small little gap. And the reference is telling me that that small little gap is reading as a black line, okay, or a dark, 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 dark brown line, or something along those lines. So we want to be able to go in and very quickly paint some dark lines in between each slat on our board, okay, and ultimately, have something that looks kind of like this, okay, just some black lines running between the boards. That's a great little detail that's going to make this texture pop. Let me show you how to do it. It's really quite easy. Let me introduce the brush tools for you guys real fast. I want to jump back over into my Photoshop document, hit the F key to make it full screen, and then just grab the zoom tool and zoom in ever so slightly, something like right there. Now, before you start working with the brush tool, you got to remind yourself and remember that Photoshop works off of layers. The beauty of the system is that we can isolate these new components in a separate layer. So I'm going to create a new layer within my scene by going down to the bottom of my layers palette. So I'm going way down over here, and I'm going to click on, it's the button that looks like the little icon, okay, or the little piece of paper. Is that one right there. I'm going to create a new layer and drag it below my UVs. In an empty brand new layer, we can start painting. In our toolbar, the paintbrush is that guy right there, okay, the brush tool. We're going to talk a lot about the brush tool going forward, but I just want you guys to get into the habit of working with it today. The brush tool is just a paintbrush. So as you would imagine, wherever we paint on the screen, we're going to get a result. Okay, like that. Now, that's not the result that we want. It's a little too soft around the edges, but where we paint with our mouse, we're going to get some pixels. Okay, I'm going to go back in time a second here. There we go. And we're going to make some adjustments. So the first thing that we need to change is the color of our paintbrush. Our paintbrush is always going to pull its color from the foreground color well. That one right there. It's kind of a red, so I'm going to double click on it. And it's going to bring open the standard Adobe color picker. I'm just going to choose black by left clicking and dragging in this field to the black corner, down here at the bottom. Hit OK. And then, zoom. OK, great. Now we're painting with black, but my brush is just way too big. Yeah, Austin, what's up? Yeah, so this is kind of a quirk of working in Photoshop. What Austin wants to do is to undo a number of steps, right? Well, if you were to hit Command Z, you go back one step, but if you were to hit Command Z again, wait a minute. Command Z only goes back. You're actually, what you're doing is you're stepping backwards and then stepping forward with Command Z. It's not a true undo. There's a couple different ways that we can go back in time, a number of different steps. Okay, you can go into the Edit pull-down menu, and there's step backwards, and then you can keep going. You can step backwards as far as you want. That's kind of laborious. I don't like going into the menu. So here's what I almost always do. In this part of the interface, check it out. This guy is our histories palette, the one with the little arrow. So if you open it up, it shows you every operation that you've done inside of Photoshop. So here's the brush tool. So if I just go back in time a couple steps, I can step backwards. Okay. All right. So this is clearly not the result that I want. What's wrong with the size of my brush? It's massive. It's way too big. So we need to make some changes. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that the brush tool comes with a whole bunch of options. And this is kind of a Photoshop interface thing. Whenever you turn on a tool, this top row is going to show you all the options for that tool. This one, if we click on it, it's going to bring open this flyout menu. And you can see that we have two channels here that we can adjust on the top. The size, which we're going to make much lower, and the hardness. The hardness is going to determine kind of the feathering along the edges. I'm going to lower this value, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe somewhere right around 90. See what we get? Yeah. Now we're talking. There we go. That's pretty good. Maybe lower the size of my brush even more. Yeah, now we're in the ballpark. Okay. So now, yeah, go ahead. Yes, absolutely. For all the bands, we're going to come back to that in a minute. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I would encourage it. Okay. Now that I have my, my paintbrush kind of dialed to where I want it to go, I want to make some straight lines. Okay. Now, with the mouse and even with the Wacom tablet, you can see that even I'm trying really hard right now to make a straight line, and I am failing miserably. Okay? So let me show you the Power User keyboard shortcut that will allow you to paint straight lines quickly. You have to click first. Okay? So I'm going to click up here, and now if I hold down the Shift key after I click, it's going to make a straight line. Okay, let me do that again. I'm going to zoom out a little bit too. There we go. Grab my paintbrush. I'm going to initially click, then hold down Shift, drag a straight line down. Click, hold down Shift, drag a straight line down. And I'm looking very carefully, or I'm trying to look very carefully to see where that natural dividing point within the planks are. I'm making my planks a little too big right now. I think this black line is really extreme. It's too thick. But I wanted to have a real obvious example so you guys can see what we're doing. So click, hold down Shift, drag out a straight line. Click, Shift, drag out a straight line. And now, within just a couple of strokes, we've created an illusion that there's a small little gap between each of the planks. Now, I've overdriven it way too much to make it easy for you guys to see what's going on. If I was to go back and do this again, I would make that black line much, much smaller. Okay? But these are the little things, the little details that we really need to start to look to include to make our Photoshop documents pop, to really achieve that sense of realism inside the texture. Okay? what we've gained in this process is a tremendous amount of control over the editing of our texture, right? We're in the driver's seat. We're not relying entirely upon a photograph to establish the details, okay? Okay. So, naturally you'd keep going in this process and do all the planks going across, some more black lines to separate all the planks visually. But let's spend some time talking about how we can make those metal bands, okay? The metal bands can be a little bit of a challenge. So let's talk about it, okay? Let's find a texture file that's going to work. I have some metal textures saved on my laptop here. So let me just go into my metal textures. Let's find something that may work for us. I'm a total texture nerd, by the way. Some of these files I've taken myself, others have come from CG Textures. Whenever I find an interesting one, I always save it because I'm kind of OCD like that. Let's find one that could that's that one might be kind of cool. A little too brassy for me, a little too yellowy, but it's interesting. That's kind of interesting. As you can see, I have an affinity for metal textures that have a tremendous amount of rust, and chipped paint. But let's see if we can find one that will work for our example. Let's see. I have a bunch of these, as you can see. Every shape and size. It's interesting. I like that one. That one might be a winner. That one? That one? Yeah, kind of a galvanized look. Yeah. Let's use this one. Let's use it. If it doesn't look good, it's all Carlos's fault. I'm joking. Yeah, this is a good starting point. So let's use this one. All right, so there's my texture. Let's go back into my Photoshop document, turn on the layer that contains all of my UVs, and try to get a good understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here. We kind of have to decode our UV map to a certain degree to understand where to place this metal texture, right? Where do you think these metal textures need to go inside of my texture file here? Yeah, the thick clusters of horizontal lines are kind of a good landmark for us, right? Because where we see a lot of edges represents where I had a lot of geometry on my mesh over in Modo. Okay, so that's a good starting point. FYI, we're going to extend this system starting next week and make this process a little bit easier. Okay, but for today, I want to show you the power of selections and how to work with Photoshop because we can do this quickly and easily. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to select the areas that I think the metal bands need to go into. A little bit, I'm going to get all up in there. Really zoom in and do this with a little bit of accuracy. Something like that. There we go. So that area right there represents the width of my metal band. Clearly, I haven't done the length very well. Okay, let me zoom out so you guys can see what's going on. I've only gone, that far. I need to go the full length of my texture. I need that selection to be that height, but this width. Okay. Here's kind of a cool thing, and I wish someone would have shown me this when I was in y'all's shoes. There is a transform selections tool inside of Photoshop that's buried. A lot of people don't realize that it's there, but it is. It's awesome. If you were to go to the top of the screen where it says select, check it out. Kind of towards the bottom of that list, we have transform selections. Kind of like the free transform tool, but just for your selections. It isn't going to hurt the underlying pixels in that selection. It's just going to allow you to take that initial selection and change it. So I'm going to just extend it over there, and like our free transform tool, I got to hit the check mark at the top of the screen to confirm it, and there it is. Okay, I was able to zoom in, create the height of my selection with some accuracy, zoom out, transform my selection, and go the full width of my texture file quickly. Okay, I'm going to do that exact same thing a couple more times. Now, in Modo, when we want to add a polygon, an edge, or a vertice to an existing selection, what keyboard shortcut do we hold down? Shift. We're going to do the exact same thing here in Photoshop. I want to add additional pixels into my selection, so if I hold the Shift key while I'm using the Marquee Selection tool, I want to add those pixels quickly. So hold down the shift key. Looks like this is another band right in here. And I'm just going to do this quickly so I don't spend too much time. Here's another one. Cool. So on and so forth as we go down our texture. Looks like I was a little off there. So if we do now, if we were to do transform selection now, it's going to give me the entire thing. So keep that in mind. I would normally use a mouse for something like this. The mouse gives me a little bit more precision in something like that. So now I've basically, in essence, have selected all of my little metal bands. Okay? Yeah. Probably. Absolutely. Yeah, I would imagine you probably can. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute here, okay? What's important is that we have all the metal bands selected. That's the most important thing. There are, you'll find when you're working out there in Photoshop, there are a bazillion different ways to skin this cat. There really is. Everyone seems to have their own Photoshop kind of pipeline and techniques. This is just one of the many ways that you can do this. So I would hope that there are other more efficient ways of working. What's important is that we have a selection. That's the important thing. With that selection, I then can start working with some other files. Here's my metal. Let's go ahead and just put that metal file into my Photoshop document. Okay. Notice that my selections are still going, right? And I'm going to position my metal, my metal JPEG, and things are moving now. Actually, you know what I did? I did something wrong. I should have had the metal texture in there before I brought it in. Let's see if I can do a free transformation on that metal texture file. Is it going to influence? Yeah. Okay. I want to drop my selection. Deselect all layers. Okay, or deselect, excuse me. And then I'll put my texture where I want it to go. Because I need my texture. Let's see, let's rotate it. Yeah, let's do a little free transform. Rotate it. Woo! Rotate it 90 degrees. Is that going to make it the size I want? No. So let me just scale it going that way. Okay, that's good enough. We'll hit the check mark to confirm it, and we'll redraw the selection. Okay. We'll just do this really quickly. Something kind of like that. That's pretty cool. Now, I think what Waddell was asking is, can we copy that selection? I believe you can if you hold down the Shift key. Oops, no, excuse me. What is it? Option Shift? There is a way to do it, and you got to right-click on it.
A way to do what?
No, that's not what I want. So what we'll do is draw the selection. We'll just keep it old school. Hold down the Shift key here. Draw out a selection that matches the location of my metal bands.
Oh, you want to select that and click on the UV layer? And use the magic wand. Select one of the UVs inside.
Yep, you could do that. I think in our situation, that's not going to give us the result that we're after. Okay, there we go. Now I've selected all the areas of the metal band. I only want to have my metallic texture show up on the interior of my selection. Does anyone know what I have to create? A mask, absolutely. I don't want to see my metallic texture in here, outside of the selection. I only want to see the metallic texture on the interior of my selection, okay? To do this, it's really easy, which is in one of the important steps here is that I created this selection first. If you have a selection already active, making a layer mask for my metallic object is really wicked easy. At the bottom of the layers palette, you're going to find a really cool button. It's the one that looks like a white square with a black circle on the interior of it. It's that one right there. And it's going to create a layer mask. Make sure that your metallic texture layer is selected, or excuse me, is selected in the layers palette. And then, let me zoom out. I want to hit that button. Watch what happens. I'm going to apply the layer mask, and boom. Instantly, we've deactivated the visibility of all of the pixels that were outside of our selection. Okay? They're not gone. We haven't deleted them. They haven't magically disappeared. They're still there. They're still on the original Photoshop document, or on that Photoshop layer. Their visibility has just been deactivated. Okay? We've basically hidden them, in essence. Okay? We're going to work a lot with masks. So get used to working with this. How dare you, Austin? You're not allowed to look away. I'm joking. Go ahead, Austin. What's up? Yeah, so I had the areas of my UV map that represented the metal bands selected. And I just used the marquee selection tool to do that. Okay? In my layers palette, let me just hit undo real fast and kind of reverse for a second. Okay? In my layers palette, I had the photograph of the metal texture, or of the metal picture selected. And then at the bottom of my layers palette, here's the magic. Here's the magic, Austin. It's that button right there. Okay? The Add Layer Mask button. Yoink. Okay? And we're on our way. Yes, ma'am.
What if I don't use a layer mask, just delete it?
Yeah, so what's the difference is, when you delete something, it's a destructive edit. Okay? Once you delete those pixels, they're gone, bye-bye, can't get them back. The great thing about working in layer masks is that it's non-destructive. Those pixels are still there, we just turn them off. Ultimately, it gives us a high degree of flexibility. And it's really the best way to work inside of Photoshop. I can't tell you, you don't want to use the eraser tool, you don't want to delete things, because once those pixels are gone, you can't get it back. Okay? They're gone, 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 gone. Okay? We're going to talk a lot about working with layer masks. Okay? Layer masks are the key to success inside of Photoshop. Okay? It's going to be a major, major tenet of what we do on a daily basis coming up here shortly. This is just a very quick, small introduction to what it looks like. Okay? So I would follow the exact same thing. I do the exact same thing for the rest of my Photoshop document. Okay? I have a tremendous amount of work left in front of me, but ultimately what I'm able to garner here is a Photoshop document, a texture file that has a pretty high level of quality associated with it. Let me show you my finished project. Oops. So here's the Photoshop document that I did. I intentionally went a little overboard on some of the details, but as you can see, I have a lot of different layers in here. I have a lot of different layers. Each one of them has been separated out following the technique that we were just working with. And what I've been able to create here is a texture file that I have control over. So if my art director comes in and says, hey Pat, I love what you've done with some of these boards, but this one right here, I hate the ugly black spot in it. I want you to remove that black spot. Okay, I don't want that there. Well, if this was one gigantic photograph where I didn't have each layer on its, or each plank on its own layer, that would represent a tremendous amount of work, okay, to get rid of that one black dot, okay? I would ultimately have to change a majority of what I have going on here, okay? With everything broken out into their own discrete series of layers, it's about 2 seconds worth of work, because I can very quickly turn off that plank, add another one in a heartbeat, and I'm on my way ready to rock and roll, okay? This gives us control. It's not a matter if your project's going to get edited, it's when you're going to get edited, okay? Art directors, producers, clients, they have a good track record of coming in at the 11th hour and saying, hey, I love what you're doing, but I need you to change everything, okay? We're going to go in a completely different direction. This gives us the flexibility to respond to those edits in a timely manner without it completely sinking our production, okay? All right, so what do we do with this at the end? We're going to pretend that we're done working with our Photoshop document. We're all finito, okay? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with our texture file? You got to save it, right? So hopefully you're saving your Photoshop texture as you go along the way, right? Hit Command S every 5 seconds or so just to ensure that you don't lose everything, okay? Photoshop, FYI, you probably have experienced this. Photoshop has a strong, and I mean a very strong track record of crashing. And always at the worst possible moment. So please make sure you're saving your Photoshop document a lot, okay? Let's just do mine real fast. I'm going to hit File, Save. Now I'm ready to export my file and get it back over into Modo, right? We're not going to be working with the Photoshop document in Modo. Does anyone remember why from last week? It's too big. It's going to crash your system performance. It really does. Photoshop documents can get quite large, especially when you have a couple hundred layers in them, okay? I've had Photoshop documents that are gigabytes in size, okay? I'm not going to load a gigabyte Photoshop document into my 3D app. I need to reduce that into a file that's a little bit more comfortable for the rendering engine to handle. So we need to flatten this. What format did I suggest that you use last week? PNG. I love the portable network graphics file format. It's my fave, okay? It's my favorite one on the market at the moment. I'm a PNG guy. However, what do I need to turn off before I export my Photoshop document as a PNG? The UVs. Don't forget to do this, okay? Because what is on the PNG file will show up on your model, okay? So if you leave your purple UV outlines on, it's going to show up, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about, just so you guys get an idea. Yeah, I've done it on accident a number of times. So we're going to do File, Save As, and I'm just going to change my format from Photoshop to PNG. In addition, the PNG file format also supports transparency, which is nice. Just leave it on my desktop.
Pat, what if you save it as a TIFF?
That's fine. TIFFs are fine. TIFFs, Targas, PNGs are my faves, okay? I wouldn't use anything else on the market. TIFFs, Targas, and PNGs, okay? So I saved my PNG out. Let's go back over into Modo real quick and explore how we can wrap that PNG back on my barrel. So as we know, this is a shader tree operation. So I'm going to click on my base shader, add layer, image map, load image, navigate to where we saved the file. For me, it's on my desktop. There it is. There's the PNG file with my purple outlines and everything. Hit open, and there it is. Whee! Okay, looking pretty good. Looking really good, actually. Except for the gigantic purple outlines all over the quality of my mesh. Bad. Boo. I don't like you. Okay. One of the cool things about working inside of Modo is that any change and update that we make to the texture file is going to ripple over here into Modo. So if you accidentally forget to turn off your UV outlines in Photoshop before you export, don't freak out, okay? Just go back to your Photoshop document. This is why we have it in Photoshop, right? And just deactivate that layer, save a new version, okay? So here's my Photoshop document. I'm going to turn off my outlines, and then if you save as, but keep the file name the same. So if you're just basically replacing your file, let's change it to PNG. I'm going to replace the file that I already saved. Save, it says, are you sure there's already one that exists? Do you want to overwrite it? Yeah, I'm going to overwrite it. We'll replace it. Okay, check it out. The moment I go back over into Modo, it's going to say, hey, a change has been made to a texture that's currently applied to my scene. Do you want me to update it? Yes, I do. Bye-bye. And all those purple outlines are gone. Okay? I love this system. It allows us to iterate quickly. It allows us to throw some textures on a Photoshop document, okay? Put it on our model, and very quickly get it back into Modo and see exactly how it's going to look on the model and how it's going to render. Okay? Yeah, I only did a couple planks, so. Question? Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I would like you for this week's homework assignment to go back into your wine barrel and begin to add this level of detail into your texture map. I know some of you guys did a fantastic job texturing your wine barrel before. So if you already feel as though you have a strong example, go back into that file and use some of the techniques and the ideas that we've talked about today to kick it up to 11. Okay? I want you guys to have a really, really strong visual, a really strong diffuse texture map for this project so that you can incorporate it into future projects down the road. Aha! So if you do not see PNG as a save option, here's what I want you to do. And Dylan, let's just we're gonna out you here. What computer number are you? You're 10. So Dylan did something a little funky. Yep. So he's in save as. PNG is not showing. Oh, sorry. You guys probably want to see it, huh? Let me change the projector to that input. So PNG is not showing up in the list. Dylan, I'm going to take over simultaneously just for a second here. Cancel it out. Here's what Dylan forgot to do. Dylan forgot to change the color space from CMYK to RGB. The PNG is only available if your color space is RGB. So he forgot to change this when he opened up that EPS file for the first time in Photoshop. Luckily, we can change this after the fact. Dylan, if you were just to simply go up and hit RGB color, boom. Don't merge, because then we'll lose all our work. Okay? And now when you do File, Save As, there it is, the PNG. Okay? No worries. Let me give you back control. You're on your way. Okay. Real quick, I just want to touch base on what I would like you guys to do for your lab assignment this week. I know I've pontificated longer than I should have today, and I've talked much, much longer. For that, I do apologize. Let's go back over to renderography and just kind of revisit the expectations for our lab. You're going to continue UV mapping, okay? We're going to continue getting better at UV mapping. So I've given you a very simple, very, very simple scene that I would like you to generate UVs for. Each one of these items is going to generate its own discrete UV map. At the conclusion of this project, what I would like you to do is create UV maps for objects 1, 2, and 3, and then please just put a very fast checker material on those objects to ensure that what you're generating is working on top of the mesh. Okay? When you render, I want to see those checker patterns on the actual render. Okay? As always, at the conclusion of your lab, you're going to be producing your LXO and the render. Okay? And the render. I want you guys to get into the habit of checking your UV maps with that checker pattern. It's the best way to see if the distortion and the placement of your UV islands within your positive UV space is correct. Okay? This is just a pretty picture. Yeah. Checker pattern, please. Okay? If you look at the file, let's just look at the lab file here real fast. It's Modo blocks. There it is, okay? So these are what you're going to be striving to unwrap. I'll give you a little bit of a hint and a head start on this. Or let me just ask a question. For the flat surfaces on these objects, what tool are you going to use? Project from view. For the cylindrical surfaces on all of these objects, which tool are you going to use? UV unwrap, okay? Now, please don't try to unwrap the totality, the entirety of this shape in one go. You're not going to do that, okay? You're going to get little pieces. I think the best and the brightest example of that is Modo block number 3, which is going to produce a significant challenge, okay? Where people go array on this lovely, lovely challenge, they try to unwrap it all in one piece. That's not going to happen. Do it in small little chunks, okay? Specifically, I put this hole in here to give you guys a little bit of a challenge to work with. Here's my strategy. I would do the inside separately from the outside. Okay, there's the inside. Let's just hide that geometry. Now, UV unwrap is going to give you a much, much better result. Okay, I'm also going to select the borders here, the openings, and now UV unwrap, better. Okay, you start to pair that with UV relax. UV relax. Okay, you'll get a good result. Okay, for the enterprising students that are on it, that are mini detectives, the solution to all 3 of these is online. That's all I'm going to say. The solution to all three of these is online. You can find it easily if you know me and what I do. Tomoko's nodding her head because I think she's already found them. So if you really, really, really want to watch me do it, be detectives. It's out there. The answer to this little challenge, this puzzle is online somewhere. Okay? All right, questions? B, yeah, go ahead.
I'm having trouble with the options. I'm sorry.
Render options. Okay.
I can't find them.
Let me stop that